Alrighty, welcome back to my series where I do little preview videos at the beginnings of furry visual novels. This time, we're checking out Sparks, A Tale of Ink. Prologue. Thus ruled the Sovereign. Final chapter. What? Thus he held the final divine remnant in his hands, the still beating heart of a dead god. As the king felt it merge with his own body, memories flooded back into his mind. Times of happiness, with the man he loved more than anything in the world. I feel like this font might as well be dark since it's on a light background. Times of war and conflict, the two of them could overcome together. Times of loss, as he held the lifeless body of his beloved in his hands on that fateful night. Times of change, as the messenger from the stars began to talk to him, giving the king advice on where to go and what to prepare for. Times of disaster, as the owner of the heart he now held was attacked by a fell creature. And lastly, the decisions he made to save those who would still hang on to hope. The remnants of power still crackled through his veins after a hidden potential awoke to him at the border of despair and hope. He had lit the very first spark. The spark of hope. And now he would have to clear the dark clouds of calamity that were covering Cirque's skies. Has almost the vibe of like Yerk and stuff like Animorphs words. With the might of a god and his newfound ability at his side. With all his hope for the future, he only wished that his lover was still looking on to him. As he ascended the world's throne as the sovereign, changing Cirque forever. Let's see. It always feels a little weird to me when the text speed is set to maximum by default. This reads like a religious children's bedtime tale. Chapter 1. What we want, what we need. As Zhangken closed the book, he let out a soft groan and dropped the volume on the floor next to his bed, a small dust cloud rising up in response. 3, 4, 8, 10. 10 more pages that have just praised the Sovereign. Again. How dare anyone call this facts in their right mind? The lack of any information regarding agriculture, cuisine, battle techniques, anything. At best, this was a bad attempt at historic romance. No, wait. Unless... where are the sources? He proceeded to shoot up to his feet and immediately felt his back hurt. Regret for the sudden movement coursed through his being. Yeah, I feel like the file of this whole game might benefit from just being dark if this is going to be the background. A white outline technically makes a black outline makes on white text is technically legible on any background, but it's not necessarily ideal to be white on white. How long had he been curled up in this horrible reading position now? He couldn't recall. While doing some stretches to relieve the pain, his gaze wandered through his dorm room. The wooden floor was holding up well, despite the dust that it had been collecting for who knows how long, in addition to being assaulted with books on the regular. The smell of burning wax and smoke lingered everywhere, especially in the fabrics of his bed, his clothes and fur. It was hard to get rid of those when he couldn't open the window during the rainy seasons, lest he desired water damage on the books. The mere thought of it made his fur bristle. He gave a quick glance to his desk. He could check what he had written down during the previous reading sessions, but on second thought, Zhangken sat down once again with a heavy sigh. In his head, he started to recount what the book that he had just read stated, and realized that the focus was overtly on the relationship between the king and his second-in-command. How come I never noticed the many moments that these two spent together in the lush fields, the noisy taverns, and cozy fireplaces? I should begin to inquire better on these works, with others in the future. Drained of energy, he opened the book to check when it was written. The foreword didn't even include a date of publishing. Horrible, non-standard, and rescribes didn't even fix this? How hard could it be to plaster a date somewhere? He kept mumbling to himself as he found the afterword. Once he got past many more pages that told of the Sovereign's many deeds. Deeds Zhangken couldn't care less for. The student finally found the author's name. Caellam Swiftquill. His title implied that this man had penned even more books, a thought that made Zhangken shiver. A page after credited the rescribes that were responsible for the book. They probably put more effort into publishing copies of this piece of ash than the author did writing it. The next few pages included more unnecessary credits that Zhangken skipped over until he finally found a number. I think they already said that with the last part about the book. 1996. Really? That's atrocious, even for a delusional piece of fiction. What's this here, then? We attribute this work to the learnings of ascension that he taught us. No, no, no. Full of spite, he tossed the book into the air. Of course. Written by some religious zealots. Of course this wouldn't lead him anywhere new. Only, once again, back to the start. It's worth mentioning it is very noticeable this has been translated, because the localization is not, it doesn't quite work. Oop, that doesn't quite fit. Already at the brink of yelling out a curse he learned from his grandmother, Zhangken wanted to catch the volume again so as not to suffer a concussion, until he realized that a small piece of paper was fluttering down next to it. Immediately he thought that it had been his fault, that he tore away a corner of the page and went through the scenarios in his head of what would happen if he returned the book in this state. A second cataclysm to tear sky and sea asunder, ash and molten stone raining down on his head. Perhaps he could ask Gale to fix it for him, but then he hadn't returned any of the favors that they did for him yet at all. Before more scenarios could go through his head, the book already landed back on his head and the torn piece of paper on his knees. To his relief, he noticed that the page didn't belong to the book at all. The material and handwriting were completely different from the rest of the dreadful tome. Strangely enough, it didn't line up with any writing he'd seen before. The book he just finished was from the Flatlands and had a curvy style, but what he saw here was very different. I don't know if I'd say he finished the book if he never found this thing inside of it. An elegant form with strict lines and no smudges at all. A truly professional calligrapher must have written it. Slightly awestruck, Zhangken actually took to read what was written on the paper, only to be disappointed by it being some nonsense with a single cryptic sentence next to it. Ascension's truth. Right at the ET. His enemy, but with a 4? Page 38. He turned the piece around to be greeted by a half-cut-off sentence that reached the end of the page. Meckenwaith anaid it even at Niage. No, you can't read it backwards. Tnad. No, that's not a thing either. Meckenwaith anaid did I actually can't tell if that's supposed to be, if that's a specific language, either real or fake, or if it's a code, because it could go either way. The verdant tongue. He easily recognized it, as it was one of many languages that were no longer spoken after the Sovereign's ascension. They were found in books written by the last king himself, though. Yet the strange note intrigued him far more. Ascension's truth. Right at what? And who did this Enem belong to? Curiosity immediately crept up on him. Someone who must be doing similar research to him then hid a note in this book. No one else would look at it, other than those desperate for knowledge such as himself. Immediately, the euphoria of discovery turned into a sense of dread. Sure, he had found something of import, but what would he do with it? He had no clue as to how to decipher the code, nor could he read the text to assign it to any textbook. The potential truth of the world was at his fingertips, and he couldn't even solve the hint that he had received. Zhangken felt just as pathetic as he had at home. He fell back and kept looking at the piece of paper, taking it in the rain that was falling against the window. Truth of what the world was forced to exist like this. Of why the world was forced to exist like this. Perhaps the records were just that. Truth. But why, then, had there never been more to it? You will never find the truth if you aren't even looking for it. One of the many platitudes Caellam came up with to motivate him in the face of roadblocks that he couldn't overcome himself. Caellam. Perhaps... Zhangken shot up and grabbed into the brown leather bag that was sitting next to his bed. He sifted through a book bound in brown leather, stopping at a very specific page. There he found the timetable of Caellam's lectures for the month. He was in a lecture now, but Zhangken could probably ask him about it afterwards. Zhangken himself might be at a loss, but his professor had always been encouraged to ask for help. So what kept him from it? He grabbed his bag and slung it over his shoulder, then proceeded to look at his own calendar. These were located in every dorm room. Put a little sash on. There it is. I swear I've seen this art before. I tend to just hop into these blind and be like, look up on a list, browse around them, let's click on that one, and I just kind of download it and go. Like, that's my level of scrutiny. It's vibes. I just grab whatever looks interesting and then play that one that day. I feel like I follow the artists that did this. I'm trying to think of if they did sprites for the smoke room or if they did fan art for the smoke room, because they look like they've drawn smoke room or smoke room adjacent art before, given the elements of how the overall like pose and shading looks. While the pages were slightly yellowed with age, it was in good condition still. No need to change what wasn't broken. He made sure that he was on the right day, and in shock, realized the month of downpour was ending in just 2 days. It was easy to lose track of time, but the calendars were installed in such a way that a ray of light would be focused through the windows onto the current day. People worked hard on that technique for years. Whoever set them up must live a life of luxury now. He discarded the thought and took in a sharp breath, leading him to cough immediately from the dust that he had swirled up. How would a window do that? I'm not ignoring the idea that maybe on some level it's like, might even be like a real life technology on some level, but intuitively I'm like, the sun moves so much during a particular day that the celestial movements over the course of a month or the year, I don't know how you track those in a way that isn't ruined by the fact that everything's moving so much moment to moment. Huh. With confidence in his mind, Zhangken snapped the thumb and middle finger of his right hand, making the fire in his fireplace and candle disappear. He's got fire magic. Unless it's technology. A familiar warmth filled Zhangken's chest for a moment, and after taking a deep breath, he opened the door and left his room. So it's magic. He absorbed the fire, seemingly. The first lecture hall was easily located. Caellam was, luckily, always assigned to the same one. At some point, he said it was simply a location he preferred, even though all the lecture halls were supposed to look the same. He opened the door to the hall with a horrible antler knob and started looking for a vacant seat. Between the mixed figures of listeners, he could also spot some people from his own inauguration. After all, there was no rigid timetable to adhere to. He let himself fall onto a chair next to a pair of students who were squinting their eyes, looking at the illegible writing that the raccoon plastered onto the board and back at their own books. Zhangken chuckled with confidence and inched closer to the two of them. His experience with the rather eccentric history professor had been similar. Zhangken reached for one of his own notebooks with precision and put it down so that the other two, who started focusing on him instead of the lecture, could take a peek into the notes. He's explaining Sodites again, isn't he? It wasn't even a question. It is said that the world had fallen into patterns at the behest of the sovereign, but people are doing so as well. They're just harder to spot. The periods at the end of sentences definitely just appear and disappear from sentence to sentence. Every now and then, Caellam had to talk about how he had revolutionized the water systems of the bigger cities thanks to his discovery of notes on the so-called sodites. One of them, a panther dressed in light robe, stared back at him. Aye. And me and my mate here can't follow a single word he's saying. We both know our ins and outs of basic sparks and such. But what in the name of the depths is he talking about? What exactly do you mean? He likes to talk a lot when the day is long. Steel construct systems lie down, a redundant feedback loop of ink-based circuits that either lead to a positive feedback loop or on exposure of a muted negative feedback with a suppressed loop if transparent absorbent casing is used. I don't know if that's a mess to read because he doesn't know what he's saying or because it got garbled. What in the name of the sea does he mean? He means, well, he's just taking words he read and uses them to appear smarter. What now? The words. He doesn't know what they mean either. He just wants to appear smart. What? Then why is anybody here? He just, what? What kind of history professor just makes things up? Believe it or not, the best one out there. He has helmed every single expedition to old world ruins so far, organizing and executing them. Why, he's wearing those garish old world clothes? Yes, he apparently found the patterns for them on his very first foray, and he was wearing them ever since. People never see him without the coat. So he just wants to make things seem more interested then. Doesn't help me understanding anything he said about them, those damn stones though. I only know they remember sparks or something. Exactly, and you can build complex systems around them. Like what? I certainly could explain them. But I feel like what would be much more favorable is a practical demonstration. You've been listening, haven't you? The question wasn't directed at the other student, but rather somewhere else, as Zhangken raised his voice. Large badger. Badger? Raccoon. I think they said raccoon earlier. It does look like a raccoon also. I'm just, intuitively, when they have that build, I'm ready for it to be a badger. The broad-shouldered professor downstairs only nodded, looking up to the two, who also began drawing the gaze of the other listeners. They did talk a lot in the open during a lecture. It's a lot of open talking. It's actually the most conversation so far. And it's specifically in a place where you wouldn't want to openly be talking. Zhangken stood up and reached out, as Caellam threw a small black gemstone at him. Smooth as a touch, he almost dropped it but managed to grasp it properly. The surface was non-reflective and he could feel something wrapped around the stone akin to a thread. With turning it a little, he could see that a thread connected down to the end of the lecture hall where Caellam was holding a different sodite. What's that now? Your cue, I'd say. Do you have any ink? What kind of question is that? Of course I do. The majority of the conversations in this game so far being with an unseen character is a bit of a choice, because it feels like that means the character's never going to show up again, because they're not important enough to have a sprite. So it feels like you could maybe rope in a more important character to introduce them sooner, instead of spending time introducing Nameless Panther. What kind of, The Panther grasped a ring, similar to the one that Zhangken wore, and took it off. It was made from transparent glass-like material and filled almost to the brim with a white substance. Are you ready down there? I'm always ready. Can we start? Oh, he looks so happy. Look how happy he looks. Sure can. Stone in hand, Caellam went to the window with it. He opened a small compartment with trained expertise, then held it outside into the rain. Well, what now? Now you put some ink on the stone. Easy as that. Said and done, the panther pulled on a small latch on the ring's side, letting a droplet of ink escape from its confines. For a moment things went well, until the water began pouring out of every inch of the stone. In disgust, Zhangken dropped the sodite and accidentally rammed his hand into the panther's side, who still had the compartment of his ring opened. The sudden movement made more droplets of the substance spray around. They landed on Zhangken's hand and the panther's cheek. Pain spread through his hand immediately, and he screamed out loud. "Oh, flames, what did you do?" "Didn't do anything, you hit me." The panther was holding his cheek where the ink landed, likely feeling the same pain as Zhangken. "Oh, I make it stop hurting." "Just wait a bit, it's been..." He inhaled sharply. "Just a droplet. The sensation should be gone in a moment." "What happened?" This guy's just like, yeah, the entire time. Maybe he just really loves seeing students fuck up and be in pain, or maybe, I don't know, maybe the expression should have shifted at some point. Didn't you know that you're not supposed to touch ink? It's the first thing young sparkers learn. Water had begun to pool on the floor from the sodite he dropped before. Coordinating his legs was hard, as he still felt the sharp pain course through his hand. All the while, Caellam's booming laugh got louder by the moment. Okay, no, he's having a great time. The pain had finally started to fade as Caellam picked up the stone that had dropped, emitting water, and threw it out the window compartment he opened earlier. He cast it out with precision, despite the angle being extremely sharp. Then he placed his own sodite down on the wet floor and poured a drop of ink from a small glass onto it as well. In the blink of an eye, the water was gone. "Thank you, Professor." "No problem, boy. I like helping out those that bite off more than they can chew. And let me tell you, dear Zhangken here always picks the biggest meals from the pile." His laugh filled the hall once again. He then checked on the two students to make sure they were fine. Other than his wet paw, Zhangken felt fine and grumbled a thank you in his direction. His streak of being an inconvenience kept going on. "If you have been observing," he turned to the entire class now, "this is what a positive feedback loop on the basis of an initiator looks like. The sodite I used absorbed water, and the signal was led to the other sodite that would then redistribute it. As it was the recipient of the signal, it keeps going as long as there was an input, and that is how the water system in this academy works. Note that down, please. It will be relevant to the test. Now, everyone can go. Except for Zhangken. I assume there was a reason why you came to attend a lecture for a class you've already passed." And then interrupted it by doing a demonstration that ruined things in the middle of that lecture. After everyone had left, student and professor looked at each other for a few moments, the silence only broken by the rain and wind outside. Then Caellam burst into laughter. "You have quite the knack for this, you know." "Excuse me?" "You know, causing trouble." "Please, I know full well that I don't do it on You know full well I don't do it on purpose. Yet it seems that trouble follows your every little step. But that aside, why, what is so urgent that you need to sit through a lecture? Well, half a lecture at least, just to talk with me." "Right. You see, I got desperate and I looked through any kind of book that was talking about the Sovereign's ascension." "Did you find anything important? Anything new about his name, his species, his lover, the strange creature from the heavens that assisted him?" "No, nothing at all." "So a day well spent then. I hope you enjoy a taste of what it's like to investigate old world business." No, I really don't. But that's not my point. Here, look at this." He produced the scrap of paper. "It's not made of the same paper as the book I found it in. Look, there's some notes here." "What? What is this text on the other side?" "I can't read it. It's in the verdant tongue. Zhangken, it refers to dragons in some way." "To dragons?" "Yes. Here, drag means dragons. We found the word next to a drawing of what we concluded as being one." This might be a huge discovery, as we barely have any references to the creatures themselves. What about the rest of the text? Can you read that as well? Admittedly, no. Not without reference material. Let me copy the text so I can look up what this might mean. Are your studies of the verdant tongue going anywhere? I figured I might try learning more of it when I have the further access to material from the old world. Right. I would grant you permission, but the whole Historian Association has to oversee your progress and give you a majority vote and all that. Which makes the fact that one book written in Old World language has been damaged even more concerning. I was hoping you might know where this belongs to. As I said, I don't. What about the other side? The numbers, the ENEM. Ascension Truth? Ascension's Truth? Huh? Oh, that's not hard to solve. I think I figured out already. A feeling of glee overcame Zhangken upon hearing this. Finally, progress? So, what is the solution then? I figured you'd best find that out yourself, lad. As his emotions had soared, they came crashing down immediately. It felt as if a hammer had struck him and knocked the air out of his lungs. What? Oh, you know, proactivity is the essence of discovery. Do it yourself or you'll never do it. I am unsure where to start then. Well, perhaps you could find the person who wrote it. If they are a student, or on the Academy's educational body, you know who to ask. I am not going to Gale's sparring lessons. You might just have to. It's all they have scheduled in the next few days, and they like to retreat into solitude after teaching all day. Oh, ashes. I don't want to hear anything about combat. I don't care. Come on, Zhangken, without sacrifice. Discovery is out of reach. Fine, I'll do it. But you know full well that I won't enjoy it. Light speed, lad. Let's meet for lunch again tomorrow in any case in any case of us make discoveries to any degree, yes? Oh, that one's a mess. That one's a big ol' mess. In any case of us make discoveries to any degree, yes. Whoops. Sounds good to me. With a heavy sigh, Zhangken left the auditorium. Though progress seemed to be imminent, the sacrifice he had to make for it felt as if it favored him less than any other risk that could have been taken. Scenarios of what would come next were already playing on repeat in his head, like a painter that drew over his own pictures, showcasing only one. He hated it more than touching the water from before. Zhangken could have stood before the door to the auditorium for a few more moments, pondering the very steps that led him returning here. He pushed away memories of his first and, to date, last lesson in this very room. Alas, he had to go in there again if he wanted to further his own goals, even if it came at the cost of his nerves. He forcefully grabbed the doorknob and felt the antlers dig into his paw. He eased off immediately. Whose idea were these horrible things anyways? Cautiously, he poked his head through the opening to assess the situation. Immediately, the familiar professor's voice toned up to his ears. At least he didn't go to the wrong hallway by mistake. This time. The rows were filled with a huge number of young students, new arrivals who were present at the introduction ceremony just a few days ago. Though the academy didn't force any uniforms onto students or professors, many showed up wearing light clothing. Different colors and fabrics indicated the diverse origins of students at the academy, but the similar cuts of clothes they wore betrayed the picture of a diverse world. They were free to come and study whatever subjects they preferred under a single condition. Everyone that wanted to attend the academy for free had to discover and demonstrate their spark. The lecture hall had a hanging smell of writing ink and mixed musks of their students, combined with hints of different soaps. The scribble of quills on paper fought a losing battle against the wind, rain and lightning raging outside. A harmony that would comfort him. Yet it was the subject being taught that filled him instead with dread. In trying to look for a free seat, he stared down to the bottom of the lecture hall where the familiar white-furred fox kept talking about the history of combat and its current-day applications. This nonsense again. Zhangken mumbled as he took a seat, as far removed from anyone else as possible. Yet he drew a few eyes of attention and smirked. Could he possibly persuade them against learning the arts of combat? Wars were a thing of the old world, after all. Unless you were fighting the dreaded dull beasts. You there, girl with the thick arms. What do you hope to gain from learning how to wield a sword? Well, she's got thick arms, so maybe they're not the best target to dissuade. The girl didn't want to draw her eyes away from the professor at the front and tried to answer as subtly as possible. I want to join the Sovereign's army and eradicate the dull beasts. Her voice was louder than expected, and Zhangken flinched in response. Gale did not react to it, though. Shush! But why? There are so many professionally trained soldiers who go and hunt them already. Yeah, well, they can die. Or age out. If the problem is there, then you still need to keep training the next generation that's going to do it. They fall in battle, they need to be replaced. I need to do my part to make the world safer. After all, they aren't invincible, you know? What do you mean? When I was much younger, my home got invaded by one of those creatures, and a brave soldier sacrificed herself to save us. Her partner killed the beast, and we had to relocate to the capital. Then you could just fight them with your spark, no? What's yours? I can reshape flames. See, that is already such a useful ability to use in the battlefield. Why go out of your way to learn how to wield a weapon of steel? Because it's fucking rad? Get owned. What does this guy sound like? I have no idea. He's a combat guy. Wasn't he a little fox, though? I don't know. Because both the girl and Zhangken flinched as they heard the professor speak up and turn around, their uneven gaze fixed on the two of them. A weapon is not a finite resource. But on the battlefield, one quickly finds themselves out of ink. Thus, the fool who does not bring a weapon for protection falls to their own arrogance. The girl, and everyone else in the lecturing hall as well, wrote down what Gale said straight away, while Zhangken sighed in frustration. Now to you, Zhangken. They have heterochromia. I see that blue eye in the back. Your comments make it clear you have no intention of learning today. Is your only purpose to disrupt? I actually came to ask a question. During my lesson, why? Is it combat related? Well, no. Then perhaps it'd be been a better idea to wait until after and not complain about me talking about the current subject. Well, I intended to wait, but your irrational hatred of weapon-based combat has you talking again to my students during my lesson? I just don't think it is all that useful. I see. Would you join me at the front, then? I am not particularly fond of... That was not a request. Come here. Now. Zhangken contemplated his situation and slowly made his way to the front where his friend waited. He could have simply turned around to exit, but that would have left Zhangken standing on an even looser foot with them than before. With a heavy heart and a sense of dread building in his chest, he chose to stand right in front of Gale, only barely matching their height. As always, their mismatched eyes didn't betray a single thought that was going on in Gale's head. Though if Zhangken had to guess, what would come next was a mix between education and humiliation. At least you seem to understand your situation. Splendid. Dear students, this is Zhangken, one of the oldest students gracing our halls these days. Not because he has been here for very long, but rather due to his late decision to join us here. I decided not by my own accord that my spark awakened so late. You could have always joined us the other way. Whatever. I am not having this discussion now. Not in front of everyone. What is it you want, then? I could ask you the same thing. What is it that you promised yourself to get for barging in my lesson? Well, I found a clue while doing research and I needed your help. Yet another delusional request regarding your strange quest to prove me wrong in believing that the Sovereign is a true god in the New World, I assume. Perhaps today I shall humor you. If you would be so kind as to assist with a demonstration of stances and their import in battle. He would have declined on the spot if it weren't for the fact that he really needed Gale's assistance on the matter. So he stood upright and nodded, despite the impending ridicule that he could already feel on the tip of his tongue. I do have to admit, though, I didn't bring any of my countless training swords that decorate my room, so I have to say that then I shall supply you one. I would not be teaching combat if I were not ready to grant arms at any given time, my good friend. Ashes. He cursed under his breath. Gale swiftly procured an additional sword from a rack located near the podium, then drew one that they were carrying along. Carefully they laid both of them down onto the podium itself and touched each of them. Sharp. A single word. No, that wasn't a warning, was it? That was a command. Like, sharp. Resounding with power, echoed through the entire lecture hall. A clear shiver could be felt by everyone witnessing Gale's powerful spark as at work as they lifted their fingers from the swords. The action had no indicator of what happened. Usually a spark drew with it a visual or audible indicator. The power simply became true. It was not like the swords lost their sharpened edge. Rather, it was as if the sword had always been blunt. As with every time that Gale used their spark, a single feeling of unease crept over Zhangken that he could tell from looking at those sitting in the seats. He could see them shivering, confused or nauseous. Zhangken could be assured they all felt unease after Gale altered the sword's state. A terrifying power, used for such a normal act. There was a reason why Gale had been chosen to become an inheritor of the Twistwood title. So they've got like Edward Elric alchemy powers, I think. They can reshape things. With one hand, he took up the sword Gale had taken from the rack while the professor wielded their own. It was more decorated than the practice sword handed off to the students. While Gale fluidly took on a stance he could remember seeing once before, Zhangken tried to follow suit. I need water. Sorry. Zhangken tried to follow suit, imitating something that he had seen in one of the practice books. His legs slid apart while he held the sword with both hands in front of his body. What are you doing there? Why are you holding the blade with both hands? It could not be clearer the sword I just gave you is a one-handed weapon. Well, then what am I supposed to do with my other hand, His hands were wrapped around the stout leather of the handle before. Now his left one let go and started hanging off the side. He could admire the simple yet forward forge work of the sword in his hand for a few more hours if he were given the time, but as Gale already built visible tension, he knew that he would have to react soon. Zhangken tried to assemble his thoughts and memories, drawing a line with his mouth in order to assume a proper fighting stance as well. Right foot forward, left foot back, hand behind his back, clenching a fist, blade slightly angled, horizontally before him. It looked a bit like the one he assumed before, but this was supposed to give him a better flow of energy. Oh, rain stance? Against another one-handed blade? I really thought you would try something more offensive against my flame stance. Yes, well, I figured I might simply surprise you. Let us assume you put that much thought into your choosing of a fighting style. Come at me then. I am granting you the advantage. Zhangken slashed forward. A futile attempt. Gale immediately hopped back and used Zhangken's uncontrollable step forward. They slashed for a weak point. The swords collided. Gale immediately stabilized, while Zhangken's own stance wavered. Sloppy! Gale used the chance and slashed out again, this time horizontally. Zhangken tried to duck backwards but lost his own footing. He dodged barely by changing his angle immediately. Fool. You were just widening your opening like this. A determined step forward kept their movement flowing until they utilized momentum delivered a heavy vertical hit. Zhangken, after finding his balance again, grabbed the sword with both hands and blocked. His core was shaken and he fell. But Gale spun around to recover from the stagger while also keeping the energy flowing. You are thinking with the wrong weapon. A one-handed sword lets you dodge easier. They took a few steps back as if dancing and once again came in for the attack. The sound of a snap sounded through the hall. A small flame had grown on Gale's sleeve after Zhangken used his spark to place some of the flame he had stored up onto them. Gale's eyes darted towards their sleeve and then swiftly back to the direction of their opponent, who felt a sense of fulfillment. You're about to get taken out. Zhangken's weapon now rested in his non-dominant hand, while his fingers remained in the form taken on after using his spark. Gale simply sighed, as they noticed that Zhangken had no intention to wield the sword properly again. With one hand, they quickly killed the flame, marking its dying breath with a hiss. Zhangken felt disheartened and dropped his guard, focusing on the spot he planted the fire on. Foiled this easily. He could not see the follow-up attack coming and aimlessly swung his blade around. Gale feigned a strike and spun around, stopping with the sword's tip right at their opponent's throat. You are dead. You should use more fire if you want to actually harm me, or distract me even. As you cannot burn me directly, you should also have chosen a different spot for application. Learn how to wield a weapon if I teach you how to. Every breath that tries to teach, but does not reach you, is wasted. Pay attention when I demand it. Everyone knows you can easily absorb the lessons you are interested in. Or stop coming to my lectures altogether so as not to waste mine, your, and everyone else's time. They sighed and pulled the sword back, then simply beckoned for the other blade. Dull. The same sensation went through the room again, people shuddering at the pure power flowing from Gale's mouth. The swords were placed back where they belonged, and Gale looked back to the small patch of burned fabric on their shoulder. Such an insignificant attempt at diversion. What were you thinking? That the combination of smell and optical change would get you distracted enough for me to strike properly? Perhaps try to go a little bigger next time? Why not the entirety of my jacket? Or plant it on my glasses? It wouldn't have worked on your glasses. They are made of iron and glass. You know my spark doesn't work like others. Which simply shows me you cannot be trusted with expending it on your own. You will have to adapt eventually. Thanks. They turned towards the students who had watched the quick duel, eyes focused, as they wandered through the rows. I presented to all of you a prime example as to why you are not to slack off in regards to your training. First and foremost, you should learn basic stances for any of the commonly used weapons, and how they are utilized during combat. Not like practicing against normal weapons will give you any advantage against creatures that act on instinct. Once the rainy season stops, we can practice outside where everyone will have ample room. That was a little startling cut. Take my teachings to heart, and you will surely not find yourself in a situation like our dear Zhangken here. Probably want to put in a slower fade out for that music. At least I don't think that this was meant to be like a particularly biting moment that would interrupt the music like a record scratch. You can be sure I do not plan to find myself in this sort of a situation again anytime soon. Thank you very much. With this, you are dismissed. Read up on what we went through, and try to think of any way to apply your own magical abilities towards weaponized combat. The sort of students lifted slowly, packing their books and writing utensils as their gazes lingered on Zhangken and Gale in the front. Some filled with pity, others with curiosity, and yet more with valor to do better. Gale gave Zhangken a pat on the shoulder, a rare sign of affection from the usually cold professor. Their arm was muscular in a practiced way, slightly thicker arms than an average person would have, fur hiding the exactly trained muscles. In comparison, Zhangken's old muscles were barely maintained and stimulated at best, leftovers from his days at home where he was asked to carry materials of any kind for townsfolk and merchants alike. Was that really necessary? You know I can't just grasp any of those techniques and stances described in your books you recommend to me. Gale shook their head and sighed heavily as they scraped together a number of documents and cleaned up the blackboard. When they stood in front of Zhangken with crossed arms once again, their eyes analyzed him from the uppermost tuft of hair to his shoes. You are in terrible shape. Even I could see that. This was simply an important lesson for the class, and for you to take better care of yourself. I do take care of myself, otherwise I wouldn't be here, standing, breathing. Zhangken, you are shaky, likely due to malnutrition, if I were to make a guess. Additionally, you stink. Horribly. I stink of what? Smoke, writing ink, paper. I wouldn't call that an unpleasant smell exactly. Gale sighed at the response. Your clothes and fur are dusty. You are not taking care of yourself, and this worries me. What have you been doing? Of course you were reading. Your obsession with the sovereign, despite your lack of faith, is frankly disturbing. Why not simply accept him as the ruler of the now? Oops. Because I just can't concentrate on anything else, Gale. Ever since I was young, I knew that there was something wrong with the stories we've been told. Something wrong? With the god of our world? Are you listening to yourself? What is there to be wrong with divine will? Everything we know of the world could be wrong. We are living in times without war. We have been for 2,000 years. And you have the gall to say this is wrong. Peace? That's not what Why are you hesitating then? Do you desire for the fires of conflict to burn the world to the ground once again? Because you believe the stories are not accurate. I don't want war, Gale. I simply want the truth. So what would you do once you uncover it? Perhaps even if it is a lie, there is a reason the truth is shrouded. For the better. A heavy sigh left Gale as they pinched their snout. I was worried about you. I am worried about you. You have been absent from too many lessons recently, and I have not seen you in the dining hall either. As I said, I was busy researching. You need to understand that no matter your ambition, they will not do you any good if you are in your grave. You are only 30 years old. Your entire life is still ahead of you. No need to rush. I know. Fine then. You seem to understand, and you even made an effort to fight back during the lesson. I will see what help I can offer you. Upon hearing these words, Zhangken's mood brightened. A glimmer returned to his eye. One that had vanished when he felt the bitter defeat of his friend's hand, at his friend's hands. I discovered this in one of the books I have been reading. It's obviously a ripped-out page, but there's something written on his side. To me, it seems like some strange code that I cannot decipher at all. Perhaps you have heard of an enam before. After Zhangken took out the piece of paper and waved it towards the professor, Gale held it in their own hands and narrowed their eyes. And you are sure you did not accidentally rip this out yourself? You claim it to be a note of sorts, not belonging to the original book. Yes, look. Zhangken turned the corner around and pointed exactly at the writing on the other side. Despite being almost closed already, Gale squinted their eyes even further, discolored pupils trying to scrutinize the contents of the paper as much as they could. I am going to be fully honest with you. I do not see a difference. What do you see that I do not? The text is clearly rescribed. You can see that there are no lines or anything that would indicate that a feather or stylus had drawn them. But rescribes perfectly replicate the original. How can you be so sure? Just feel over this side, then on the other. Clearly there's a relief here from putting an object down, like a quill or stylus. But on the other side, simply slammed onto the paper, just like the rescribes do it. That is quite the attention you were spending to minuscule details like this. Discerning if something has been handwritten or not is one of Caellam's very first lessons. It's rather easy once you understand the concept. Honestly, I would rather keep myself from his curriculum. My parents may trust him, but he encourages people to stray from the sovereign too much. Additionally, the ink the verdant tongue is written in has a different coloration, same as the page number. The note is a message from someone, and they are, or were, at the academy. Gale looked up at the explanation and opened their eyes again, tilting their head and smirking slightly. Full glad I am that your studies are bearing fruit, but where in all this do I fit in? I will not be able to tell you what page this torn-out piece belongs to. In excitement, Zhangken began waving about the note even more, his tail switching back and forth while his ears began to twitch. It was quite a different sight from Gale, who kept full control of their expressions. I wanted to ask you if you knew if any professor, faculty member, or student had this writing style. Of the code, I mean. And why should I? Because you just said you'd help. Come now, don't act coy about it. Everyone knows you can easily recognize if a student wrote someone else's test. Because I control all the tests of a single class. Yes, but this stays true even if someone who already graduated helps a student. I know it's happened before. So you want me to breach the duty's trust that has been imposed on me for a little puzzle that might as well be the combination of the safeguarding vault of a professor or student attending the academy, trying to entice me that I shall shirk my many responsibilities for you, a friend of 1 year. Is that correct? Indeed it is. Even if I could, I do not have the foggiest whose writing this might be. Ashes. But I do think I know someone who could potentially help us. The lead librarian is on shift tonight, and a spark might be of use. The head librarian? Which one is that again, the sheep? I doubt you have seen him at all. He usually works when the fewest people occupy the library space. So how will the spark help us? Please, just wait and see. I assume you have the shelves of books turning to food for the dust mites that may as well pay for occupying your room. You should hand some of them in as well, just as I have a volume that needs to be returned. So we meet at the library on the second moonrise today? They have multiple moonrises per day. I am glad you know my preferred times by now. Additionally, please, Zhangken. Yes. Take a bath and wash your clothes, or at least wear a new change and apply some perfume. I implore you. Huh? Professor Caellam might have a soft spot for you, but that does not excuse you being a nuisance to everyone's noses. I'm not a nuisance. Yes, you are, a massive one. To the general peace of everyone. Hey. No, I shall not argue over this. We will see each other at the library. Do not be late. And do not stink. Confused and agitated, Zhangken took his things and slowly ascended the wooden stairs of the lecture hall, his eyes catching a sigh from below. Ears, I think it said? Whoops. He wanted to avoid a bath, so at least he would put on another set of clothes and change his bandage as well. I was wondering about the bandage. It's like the first question raised by this thing is all this stuff's happening and there's this character with a bandage over their eye and you're like, how does the bandage work? How new is the bandage? Why is the bandage? When Zhangken looked back to see his friend's face, a smile quickly faded as their gazes met, and Zhangken felt himself felt a tuck on the corners of his mouth as his tail swished from side to side in excitement. Well, there's a new background. Check out that library. Oh, can I read that? So the top book says knowledge of something, I think. The bottom book on the left says the art of not giving a fuck. I think those are the only ones that are legible at all. Alright, we're almost an hour in, so I think I'm going to take a break here and leave it to you guys to check this game out if you would like to see more. This has been Sparks, A Tale of Ink. And we do know what Sparks and Ink are. Interesting setup to look at. So it's going to be a magic school. There's a few of those coming and going. But and I think this one's like 2 builds in. Specifically, I found this one by looking up fvn.li, and when I looked at it, it was literally the most recently updated game in the entire database. So congrats on the new build that just came out, apparently. I do think that there's maybe some momentum struggle at this introduction. The introduction is focused on introducing all of the characters, and so they essentially set up a plot point that'll have them investigating and going to each individual spot. That's not the worst idea, but it does mean that in essence nothing is happening so far. It's just a bunch of people that are being introduced under a shared conceit. But in particular, I think that the first scene where he's alone could have been trimmed down considerably, because it spends a long time just in his own head monologuing and doing a lot of exposition that could be more elegantly mixed into scenes where things are happening more. Whereas like the other scenes are mixing magic, like establishing of magic mechanics and so on. I did also have other comments where I'm like, this Panther character, what if it was a character instead, and so on. There's different things that could happen, but I don't know what the roster of the characters is, and I don't know where the story is going, so I can't make concrete criticisms without a much stronger impression of the overall thing. Anyway, you can check this game out via the link in the description. It's on itch.io, and you can also check out in a different link in the description the playlist for all of these Let's Tries, where you can discover just dozens and dozens and dozens of these games, because I'm just going to keep doing this. Thanks for watching like always, guys, and I'll see you next time.